Hi, everybody. Welcome. Oh, it's so great to see folks piling in. That's great. Well, while we're starting to join in, why don't you jump into the chat box? Let us know where you're joining from. My name is Elise. I'm coming to you. Normally, I'm coming to you from Hamilton, Ontario, but today I'm actually coming to you from beautiful Cashobog Lake, also in Ontario. But I'm just outside Peterborough enjoying a beautiful day on the deck today, which is very nice. So I'm lucky that my office is there. So yes, please throw in the chat where you're coming to us from. Do select everyone so we can all see where you're coming from, and we can also see your contributions. I'm really excited to get to know you today. And oh, great, thank you. Here, everyone's coming in, and I'm really excited to chat with Mallory and hear more about what she has to say. I'll just give everyone a few minutes to kind of filter in, and then I will do an official introduction. But welcome everybody. I'm seeing some of our current customers, which is great. Welcome. It's so great to see you. Some names I recognize, lots of names I don't. So if you're not a customer of Keela, welcome. It's so great to see you too. That's great. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, so I am going to dive in now because I want to give Mallory lots of time for her presentation, and I also want to make sure that we have lots of time at the end for questions. So welcome. As I said, if you're just joining us, please throw your name and where you're coming from into the chat. Make sure you've selected everyone just so we can all see where you're coming from. I'm so excited to see so many folks from across Canada and the US. This is great. All right, so I'm going to jump in now. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to be here. I know how busy you all are. My name is Elise. I am a customer support specialist here at Keela. I'm also a former Keela user from a nonprofit, so I have been right where you are. We also have my incredible colleague, Chelsea, our digital designer, helping us out today on the tech side of things. You may see her in the chat box or answering some of your tech questions, so feel free to say hello to Chelsea. My colleague and boss, Stefania, is also with us as well. I think she's also hanging out to help in chat and make sure everything goes smoothly on the tech side of things. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that Keela's head office is located in Vancouver, which is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the coastal Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and give thanks for their generosity and hospitality on these lands and waters. If you're new to Keela, welcome. Keela is a fundraiser CRM, meaning that it is designed with the unique needs of fundraisers in mind and aims to unify fundraising, communications, and donor management into one singular source of truth. Should you have any questions during the presentation that you would like Mallory to answer, please enter them into the chat box or the Q&A section, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Speaking of the chat box, as I've said a couple of times, please remember to select everyone when you're typing in, so all of our guests can read your comments, your questions, and your commentary on our session today. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive access to the recording within the next few days. Now, I am very excited to welcome our expert presenter for today, Mallory Erickson. Mallory is an executive coach, fundraising consultant, and host of the podcast, What the Fundraising, aimed at supporting nonprofit leaders to fundamentally change the way they lead and fundraising. Through her signature framework, the Power Partners Formula, Mallory provides unique tools to help nonprofits fundraise more from foundations, corporate partners, and individuals. She has trained over 60,000 fundraisers using elements of her unique win-win framework, which combines best practice from executive coaching, science-backed behavior design, and fundraising strategy. If you want to feel differently about fundraising, as well as clear and excited about your next steps, Mallory's work is for you. We are absolutely thrilled to have you join us today, Mallory, so please take it away.
Thank you so much, Elise. Thank you to the whole Keela team. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I am going to share my screen and we're going to just make sure that goes nice and smoothly, which it looks like it did. We are going to be talking about 5 fundamental habits for change makers. And we're going to start with a little sort of game. And if you've seen me do this before, please do not ruin it for everybody else. But want to throw in the chat like what you see when you look at this image. Like what is something that you see inside of there? And it doesn't have to be like the whole thing. Maybe you see it in part of it, but let's get some like guesses rolling. I think one time somebody told me they saw a guitar, a ghost. Oh, I've heard that one before. A ghost. Someone said a guitar one time, a clock, a scared face, a golf course. Oh my gosh, a dog, a zebra, a sloth. Okay, bats, mermaid. Okay, dog. Okay. Okay, this is amazing. Now my life. Oh my gosh, Gwen. No, was that Gwen? Oh my gosh. That's the best answer. Okay, now tell me what you see. Just do as fast as you can. What do you see? Okay. So take a really good look at this snake. Okay, take a really good look at this snake. Now, unless you are my 5-year-old daughter, this is not actually the coolest part of the presentation, but I think what happens next is pretty cool. How many of you, oh, sorry about that, Jay. Sorry, hate snakes. I really should have like put a little warning in there at the beginning. So I'm sorry about that. But how many of you still see the snake? Now that you're back at the black and white, just put a little, I do, Angela. Anybody else? Kind of, I do, maybe a little bit. Yep. Okay, so what just happened, right? At the beginning, nobody saw the snake, right? I don't think I saw that in anyone's guesses, but the chat was going a little fast, so maybe I missed it. And now most of you are seeing at least part of the snake. So what happened was something called experiential blindness. Experiential blindness is the concept that unless our brain has context for something, we actually can't simulate it into our reality. And then once we have context for something, we start to sometimes see it everywhere, or it's cemented into our mind. So our brain, the world that we see is not just this sort of objective world. It is this constant prediction and simulation that our brain is putting together based on our past experiences, based on the way we feel, mixed with some of what's happening in front of us. And that is continuously happening at rapid speed. So I'll give you another example of this. In Dr. Lisa Feldman's book, she talks of 7.5 lessons about the brain is what I think it's called. She talks about thirst. Okay, so how many of you have ever been really thirsty, and then you take a sip of water and you immediately feel better? Just write why in the chat. You've been really thirsty. Okay, so here's something pretty unbelievable. It actually takes 20 minutes for that water to impact your bloodstream, to actually make a difference on your hydration level and thirst. What's happening in that moment is that your brain is predicting that you have started to solve the problem, and it quenches your thirst in the moment. It is prediction. So you're probably like, okay, Mallory, like, am I on the right webinar? Because I thought we were talking about fundraising. What am I doing here? Let me show you. So this gets applied. This comes into play with fundraising a lot. So you're looking at a number of boxes up in front of you right now. And if I were to ask you, is this a lot of boxes or little boxes? Tell me in the chat, is this a lot or a little number of boxes? Whatever you think, a lot. Okay. So if I told you, okay, most people are saying a lot, really interesting, right? And if I told you, yes, this is the number of parking tickets that I've gotten in the last month, probably everybody on here would be like, yeah, that's a lot, Mallory. And like, you're definitely not parking my car. But what if I told you, and these numbers are not exact, but what if I told you that this is the number of days left between now and Giving Tuesday? How many of you still think this is a lot? Yikes. Okay, so, oh no. Okay, I love this chat. All of a sudden, it looks a lot smaller, right? The slide didn't change. The number of boxes didn't change, but our beliefs and our thoughts about what those boxes mean changed how we see them. This is what our brain does, and understanding how it works in relationship to fundraising is really critical if we want to change our results. So if we have not met before, my name is Mallory Erickson. I'm the creator of the Power Partners Formula, the host of What the Fundraising. There's my website. You can find me on Instagram. I love connecting with people there. If you take a photo of this or your computer and tag me in it, I'll connect with you. And probably like a lot of you, and you can tell me this in the chat too, I became an accidental fundraiser. First, actually, as a managing director, and then a nonprofit executive director. And you can tell me in the chat, like, if you're an accidental fundraiser too. And I had all these big dreams about what fundraising was going to look like and feel like. I was going to have donors coming to me. I wasn't going to work more than 40 hours a week. I don't know on what planet I thought I was on. But the reality was very, very different. And I call this my impact report fake phase, where I felt like I had to put up this appearance everywhere, like I had it all together, when the reality was it was a constant hustle. I didn't have a donor pipeline that I trusted. I was working 12 to 14-hour days. I ended up developing chronic pain. And I got to this moment where I was like, I cannot do this anymore. And so I gave up, which actually just meant that I switched organizations, believing that it was going to be different somewhere else. And at the beginning, it was a little bit different because there was that whole like newness buzz. But before I knew it, the same stuff started to happen again. And I remember I was literally sitting at my computer, clicking refresh on my email, waiting for one donor to just email me back about meeting, when I thought, like, if I'm doing this a year from now, like I can't, like I have to either figure this out or I need to leave the nonprofit sector. But I was like, how on earth can I do this? And so I ended up having this combination of life experiences. I got certified as an executive coach, trained in habit and behavior design and design thinking principles. Those things really fused together and fundamentally changed the way that I fundraised. And it had huge impacts on my organization. I took an organization from 1 million to 3.8 pretty quickly. But the best part was that I started to feel fundamentally different as a fundraiser. These are the frameworks that come together inside the Power Partners formula, and everything that I'm going to be talking about to you today comes from inside there as well and is inspired by that. In fundraising, we so often talk about strategy. You get templates and tools and all of these things. And maybe you don't want to admit this in the chat, but I'm going to invite you to tell me, if you are willing, how many of you have templates on your computer or open tabs open of resources or things you know that you should be doing for your fundraising, but for some reason you're not able to get them over the action line, or you're not using them, or you're not implementing them. If that's true for you, you're not guilty, Roberto. It's so normal, right? It's so normal for that to be happening. And one of the big reasons why this is happening is because we aren't addressing a lot of the things that create resistance in our fundraising. When we talk about increasing our capacity, and tools like Keela, they do that, and other tech tools can do that. But there is this really untapped capacity inside of you when we can remove your fundraising resistance. I'm just going to jump into here because I'm watching the time and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So on these webinars, we're talking about change making, right? Change making happens in these sort of two parts, right? We think about innovation, we think about these ideas, and then we have to go and implement that innovation. Or we think about a fundraising strategy, and then we go and we have to implement that fundraising strategy. And if you're like pretty much anybody else I've ever talked to, sometimes you feel like you have all this momentum in the decision-making phase, or the like, yeah, that sounds like a great strategy. And then all of a sudden you go to implement that, and the strategy can't, you start to have this doubt, right? You start to be like, oh, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Or maybe we don't really have time for that thing. Or maybe so-and-so isn't going to like it if we do blah, blah, blah. Well, if that's for you, if that's happening to you too, I want to illuminate something really important. The part of our brain that makes decisions is a different part of our brain that comes online when we go to implement those decisions. And here's why this matters. When we go to implement decisions, when we go to implement that fundraising, the parts of our brain that come online trigger our hypothalamus. So what's the big deal about our hypothalamus? I promise I'm not going to get too sciencey. Just hang with me for a second. Our hypothalamus is what regulates the release of hormones and activity of the nervous system. So what does this mean? all of the things. There's so much inside fundraising that activates our nervous system: uncertainty and ghosting, rejection, pressure to meet targets, overwork, emotional fatigue, power dynamics. All of these things very naturally impact our nervous system. So we might have this great idea about a fundraising strategy, but then the uncertainty of that strategy kicks in. Our nervous system is activated. And when our nervous system is activated, we cannot do some very, very critical pieces to our fundraising. We can't take action. We can't get over the action line. That's where we feel a tremendous amount of resistance. But we also, our capacity for connection and closeness and compassion, all of those things fundamentally change. So we tell fundraisers, just build relationships, don't be transactional, but then the system around them is dysregulating them and closing our capacity to be able to take the actions that we're being told over and over and over to take. But there are things that we can do about this. There are things. And so some of the habits that I'm going to be teaching you today are both habits from a strategy perspective, but they're also habits about how you can actually implement all of the strategies that you've been wanting to implement for a while and haven't been able to get over the action line around. The reality is that donor behavior is primarily a response behavior. We talk a lot about like, our donors like da-da-da, and our donors like da-da-da. Our donors like to give at end of year. We ask them at the end of the year. We ask them at the end of the year, and they respond to us by giving in higher numbers at the end of the year. We have so much more influence than we think we do, but we need to understand what is impacting and holding us back and our own behaviors in order to invite donors in the way that we want to. So I'm going to start giving you the 5 habits to help you be able to more effectively raise more for your organization, build healthy relationships with funders, and implement different types of fundraising strategies. So habit number 1 is around awareness. This might feel very surface level, very basic, but this is actually the core of so much of the other work. How many of you, tell me in the chat, how many of you feel like life and work and running your nonprofit goes so fast that you don't even have moments to be aware, that you get to the end of the day and you're like, whoa, what did I do in the last 8 hours? What just happened? Okay, yes. So I understand this. Things are moving a mile a minute. But I'm not talking about you needing to take an hour to sit and meditate or go on a walk. We want to find these micro moments of awareness. And oh, Roberto, let me tell you something. Okay, Roberto just said, I feel like you can see into my life like I'm on the Truman Show. Okay, so I don't know your particular life, but here's what I want you to all to know. These experiences are normal. For so many years, I thought I was a bad fundraiser because I was like, there's no way that good fundraisers feel like this. There's no way that anybody else is having the experiences that I'm having right now. And so I felt even more isolated. By the way, something that also activates our nervous system. I felt more isolated, more alone, like it was all about me and I was bad at this. This is so normal. So it's not that you're on the Truman Show, it's that this was my real life. And all of the fundraisers that I work with, this is their life too. And I don't mean that to downplay your experience at all, but to help you know that like, if you're experiencing that, it's okay. And there are real solutions for moving through it. So awareness really can start with just understanding when you get those pings in your belly, that nervousness, that dread, taking a moment to try to understand, okay, what is behind that? So what you're looking at right now is called a cognitive behavior loop. They use this in a lot of different CBT therapies, in executive coaching, a lot of different things use something like this. This is the idea that our thoughts and our beliefs inform how we feel, and how we feel ultimately impacts our energy and our action, which impacts our results. So if you are feeling anxiety, if you are feeling nervousness, if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you are feeling fear, to start to ask yourself, okay, what's the thought behind that? Or what's the belief behind that that might be leading to the way that I feel right now? Where's that resistance coming from? Discomfort is a little bit complicated because sometimes discomfort is a sign that you're right on your growth edge and you want to lean into that discomfort and you want to rewrite that narrative inside your brain to start to shift the way that you feel so that you can show up differently and with a different type of energy. Sometimes discomfort comes from toxic environments that are not your fault. Sometimes it comes from trying to implement a cringy strategy, fundraising strategy that you're like, I know this is a bad idea, but everybody's telling me to do it, right? But being able to tap into that discomfort, to just have awareness around that discomfort, and then start to get curious, just a little bit curious about where that's coming from. So use your experience in your body to be that like awareness indicator, right? And look, at the beginning, this is not going to happen in real time. All of a sudden, you're not going to have this like incredible awareness that throughout your entire day where you know, 8 hours passed in the blink of an eye, all of a sudden you have all this awareness. But you might get to the end of the day and you might realize, oh, I felt uncomfortable before that meeting. What was that about? And then slowly you'll start to integrate that more into real-time solutions to be able to address those feelings in the moment. We think about fundraising actions as if it's just the action that matters. But if you look at this loop, right? If your emotion for a donor meeting is excitement versus if your emotion for a donor meeting is fear, the action that you're going to take, you're going to have the donor meeting either way, but that donor meeting is going to be fundamentally differently. So how you feel is the number one indicator of how well you are going to be able to fundraise. The number one indicator. Okay, so people say, I don't have time to take care of myself. I don't have time for these things. It is the most important thing to be able to do anything else, let alone the fact that it's the right thing to do and you deserve it and all of those things. There is a business case for you feeling better as a fundraiser. And part of that can be attached to the beliefs that you hold about fundraising. So when I realized my tremendous discomfort fundraising, and I asked myself, okay, what's behind that? Why am I so uncomfortable going into these meetings with donors or talking about money? And I realized that I thought that fundraising was like hounding people to do something that they didn't really want to do. And I was trying to figure out like the right way to get them to do it, right? That belief around fundraising is never going to feel good. And so when I started to say, okay, but what happens in those meetings with donors where all of a sudden 3 hours pass and I feel like I was in flow and I feel so connected to them. And I realized that great fundraising in those moments is not an ask, it's an offer. It's about connection. It's about vulnerability and authenticity. It's about inviting people to make a change in their community, in the world, in an issue area that they deeply care about, right? It's about alignment of values and purpose. And when that started to become my belief about what good fundraising is really about, you better believe that the way I felt fundraising was fundamentally different. As I already said, awareness of our emotion gives us important information. Just giving yourself space to feel your feelings or that your feelings are valid is really, really important, which brings me to habit number 2. And you're probably going to be like, this is so simple, Mallory, but it is actually not very simple. And in fact, my guess is that many of you, and I say this with so much love, are not doing this for yourself, which is acknowledging and validating how you feel. So I surveyed a lot of fundraisers on my list last year and found that most fundraisers felt like they needed to push away their emotions. They just needed to like push them out of the way and like focus on the task, right? But then I asked them, okay, well, but what happens? What do you do when you feel uncomfortable fundraising? And 75% of them said they switched to a non-fundraising task. Okay, so this is what happens when we have unaddressed resistance. We avoid the actual activities that are going to make the biggest difference in our fundraising. So I have 2 scientifically proven strategies to help you move through those feelings. One is to just say to yourself, that makes sense. Might seem overly simple, scientifically proven. Going into a donor meeting, you have a lot of fear coming up, just saying to yourself, that makes sense. That makes sense that I feel nervous about this. It feels like there's a lot on the line. Oh, I'm really nervous to send this email. That makes sense. It's going out to 4,000 people and that makes me a little uncomfortable. I forget Britt Frank, who's the scientist, the therapist behind this, in her book, Science of Stuck. And on my podcast, she talked about how when you use the sentence that makes sense, it's like throwing a bucket of cold water on a fire, right? So it really helps you actually be able to move through that emotion and then take action from the place that you want to be taking it from. The other is to use a strategy called distant self-talk. And that's using a positive phrase and your first name and referring to yourself as you also. So we have a lot of dialogue inside our head. If you feel yourself having resistance to taking an action, saying something like, you can do this, Mallory, or you've navigated complicated situations like this before, Mallory. Doing things like that, it actually like zooms you out. And again, all of this has been studied in science to show that it downregulates your nervous system, helps you move through emotions and take effective action. If you want to hear more about either of these two strategies, both of them were talked about in depth on my podcast. You can go to malloryerickson.com/podcast. Britt Frank, That Makes Sense, and Ethan Kross, who wrote the book Chatter, talks about the distant self-talk. Okay. Whew. Okay. Habit number 3. Okay. How are you guys doing? Can I do like a quick check-in? Are you with me? Are you here? Are you into this? Smiley face. Okay, I love what Angela just said about it's simple, but it's not easy. Yes, this is a huge, huge, huge misconception in our sector. We have a lot of people out there saying, I'm going to make fundraising easier by giving you a template. They're going to make fundraising simpler by giving you a template. Ease is about the alignment and the embodiment that you feel fundraising. The friction inside of you, the resistance inside of you is what's making fundraising a lot harder. Those templates and tools and all those things, they can make fundraising simpler. But the ease inside of you is about this work that we are talking about. Okay, so habit number 3. Be transparent to build connection. So this is to be integrated into all of your different fundraising strategies. So there's a lot of different like conversations in our sector about trust, connection, relationships, fundraising, the interconnection between the two. There's lots of like camps and arguments. Trust is first, connection is first, relationships are first, whatever. It doesn't really matter. They are all deeply, deeply, deeply interconnected. Okay. So I think about it in this way. Trust is really important. Connection is really important, especially when we think about kind of like biological human connection, co-regulation, and relationships are all really important to funding. And so I want to talk about some strategies here. First, I want to help you understand that like when we skip trust and connection, fundraising and marketing become cringy. Okay, so we cannot skip right over to relationship building, which really just means figuring out the relationship that we need to have in order to get the money, right? So when we skip trust, we skip real connection, that's when relationships become cringy. And I want to give you an example. I remember a few years into my practice, I had like a 10-year fundraiser tell me, that they felt like a car salesperson. And I, no disrespect to car salespeople, because there are some wonderful car salespeople out there, but it made me really think about, okay, what is it about car salespeople that make a lot of us uncomfortable? Why do we feel like we need to have all the information about the car that we want before going into the car dealership? And I realize it's because we really believe that the car salesperson wants to sell us the car whether or not it's the right car for us. And so that's why we feel like we need to do all of our own homework and all of our own work and walk into that dealership on guard, because we're like, they're not going to tell us the truth, right? They're not really looking to figure out, is there a car in their lot that's really aligned with our needs? They're going to try to sell us their car no matter what. And that's what makes it feel pushy and uncomfortable. And that we have been taught something very similar in fundraising, right? We're taught to just like go on a listening tour and say, we're not interested in funding. But the whole time we're looking for clues or information that might make it possible for us to segue into a potential fundraising conversation. Or maybe if you're like me, you were told to just go build relationships for 12 to 18 months. And at some point, the person might like you enough that they bring up the idea of funding your organization. Like, that is so backwards. And then we look for these opportunities, these sort of like, relationships behind this mask. And then we look for these opportunities to like segue into them being a potential funder. But the whole time we've been holding this goal that has not been transparent. They have not been like conscious participants in. No, and it feels bad to us. And then we follow up with them and they aren't getting back to us. And we're like, wait, we thought we had a connection. Like, I thought we had a connection, but did we really? No, what we did was we skipped trust and connection and we tried to build a relationship. And that's actually not how real relationships or connection happen. So there's this incredible woman, Dr. Carol Robbins. She also came on the podcast. She used to teach this course at the Stanford School of Business that was like lovingly known as Touchy Feely. And then she wrote this book, Connect, Building Up Exceptional Relationships. And she talks about these 6 pillars of what actually builds connection. You can be more fully yourself, and so can the other person. Both of you are willing to be vulnerable. You trust that disclosures won't be used against you. And you can be honest with each other, you deal with conflict productively, and both of you are committed to each other's growth and development. Okay, this is what creates connection. And this does not always have to happen between like 2 people. This is not just in a one-to-one relationship. These are things that can happen in your emails that go out to your entire list, right? How are you letting yourself or your organization be more fully itself? Where are you inviting opportunities for your donors, for your community to be more fully known? How are you demonstrating vulnerability in ways that open up and deepen connection? Are you being honest with them? Are you being honest with them? And this can be in things that, when somebody says, oh, we want to help buy you a truck for this program, and you don't really need a truck, but you're like, oh yeah, that'd be so great. Like, that's a way that we aren't being honest with our donors when we don't sort of push back, or we don't deepen relationships and lean into each other and say, listen, your goal is to have the biggest impact possible on this organization. I know that about you, and I love that you want to give us this truck, but here's what we actually need to make the impact that you want to see us make. Those are the things that deepen connection. I want to give you like a quick tool here as well that is more about the one-to-many as opposed to the one-to-one, which is this idea of operational transparency. So we see this a lot in startups, right? I don't know how many of you tell me in the chat, have you guys used a ride sharing app before? Yes, no, yes, yes, yes. Okay, no, okay. So we have a little bit of mix of people. So 5-10 years ago, I don't even remember now, when you would call a car using a ride sharing app, you would call a number and then you would wait for the car to show up. And probably like 10 minutes in, you'd start to get worried that the car wasn't actually going to show up, and you would try to figure out if you should call somebody else. And the whole time you're sort of sitting there. And these ride sharing apps, they started in San Francisco, not in my opinion, because it's Silicon Valley, not just because it's Silicon Valley, but because getting a taxi in San Francisco was like literally impossible, not a city with a lot of taxis. And so this was a way to start to get cars. But at the beginning, you'd be like, oh, is the car going to actually come? As the apps have developed, they've started to do some things really differently. When you call a car now on these apps, they say, we're going to match you with your driver in 1 to 3 minutes. And you see this thing sort of scrolling by. And then it's like, ooh, we found your driver here. And it shows you exactly where your driver is. And it shows you the route that your car is going to take to come and pick you up. And then it tells you once it picks you up, exactly how long it's going to take you to get to your destination. All of these things create trust and connection. And they are what's called operational transparency. A lot of us in the nonprofit sector think that transparency and results all has to be about full mission fulfillment. It does not. Somebody giving you a $25 donation, what is the story that you're going to tell them about how that $25 donation solves homelessness in your community? That's a very complicated story to tell. But you can let them in. You can create operational transparency on the steps that your organization uses to ultimately address the underlying issues that your organization is working on. So figure out, what does it look like to bring people in, to be a little bit more vulnerable, to be a little bit more honest. And you do not need a big film production crew for this or anything like that. I saw an incredible example of this with an organization recently where they were bringing computers into rural communities in Africa, and they literally selfie cammed and like cell phone cammed themselves buying the computers in the US, like the air, B-roll of the airplane. Then they had like headlamps on trucks going through to like set up these computers in this school, in this rural community in Africa. That's operational transparency. That builds trust and connection. And one thing I just want to say about this is that a lot of times when we're talking about connection and honesty and transparency, we also sort of like get something wrong. We hear, don't be transactional in your relationships, right? Build transformational relationships. Don't be transactional. And we think that being transactional means don't talk about money. That is not true. Being transactional means only caring about money. Okay, being transactional means only caring about money. Yes, you're not going to have a first meeting with a donor and make a big ask of them in the moment, but having a conversation that says, hey, my goal, because I've seen your interest in solving X, Y, and Z, and I know how passionately you care about blank and blank. My goal is that ultimately we might find a way to work together in order to do X. I don't think we're going to figure that out in this meeting. In this meeting, I just want to get to know each other. I want to understand a little bit more about your orientation to this work, your experience, all those things. I want to build a relationship and I want to build trust, but I just want to be transparent also about where I hope we go, if it feels good to you, if we figure out that we're both aligned, and if it makes sense to both of us, right? That's a way that you can talk about investment and partnership early on without it being transactional and cringy and just about that, right? You're looking for alignment, and alignment happens through connection. Great fundraising is about connection. Okay, I got 2 more habits, and then we'll do questions. So habit number 4 is around continuous improvement, not perfection. So nothing harms good fundraising like perfectionism. Perfectionism leads to fear of failure, lack of adaptability, decreased motivation, lack of collaboration. Perfectionism is a protection mode, okay? Perfectionism is a nervous system response. It is when we are in fight or flight, or freeze, we go into perfectionism to protect ourselves from any type of exposure or vulnerability that would be hard for us to handle, okay? So it is not about how well we do something. You will never cure perfectionism with it will never cure perfectionism with achievement or knowledge or anything like that. Perfectionism is about what is happening inside of you. And I totally forgot to add a slide here, but I do have a mini course next week. This is sort of funny timing, on a perfectionist guide to fundraising. And so if you are interested in that, I just threw the link in the chat. But what I want you to understand is that perfectionism actually breaks trust. We think that, oh, our donors expect us to be perfect. They want us to put up this presentation everywhere, like we have it all together. But when people appear too perfect, we actually get very skeptical of them. So perfectionism breaks trust. It breaks connections. It breaks relationship building. There's actually been some really interesting studies done on like when they have tested mistakes in emails, they perform better, and including donation emails, okay? So when they have tested perfectly, perfect grammar in an email and spelling and punctuation versus mistakes, the one with mistakes performed better. It feels more human. It feels more real. Okay. I don't think we had a question. Okay. So here are a few like basic ways to start to address perfectionism if you feel like they come up inside of you. And I call myself a recovering perfectionist. So if this is you too, you are right at home here. But thinking about how you can set more realistic expectations, how you can make actions and behaviors smaller that you are expecting yourself to do, One thing that you can do, and this is particularly important in fundraising, is to track progress of behaviors instead of outcomes. So a lot of times we're just looking at money, right? Our outcomes. But if you're tracking behaviors, how many donors are you reaching out to? How many meetings have you had? How many thank you calls have you made, right? Those behaviors, then you're actually giving yourself some positive reinforcement, tracking some things positively, and that aren't just about the money, but that we know those actions and those behaviors ultimately lead to more fundraising success. The other thing you can do is celebrate failure. Oh, create a culture of feedback and learning, right? A lot of ways to overcome perfectionism is around growth and celebrating growth and creating cultures of growth through feedback and learning. Celebrate failure. In one of my last organizations, I had something called Failure Fridays, where during our staff meetings on Fridays, everyone would share their biggest mistake from the week. And these were like legitimate mistakes, not like, some kind of like virtue signaling mistake. And I always started as the leader, something I really messed up. And we would celebrate that failure and what that could ultimately teach us. Another really important piece here is around demonstrating self-compassion. So especially for you positional leaders, but really for everybody, you can say, this is a place where failure is okay. Nobody has to be perfect here. But then if you make a mistake and beat yourself up, that's what your team is watching, right? And that is not how people believe that it is actually a place where mistakes can happen. And it's really hard to beat yourself up about everything and then show compassion to everybody else too. So the more compassion, the more space you can give yourself, the better you're going to be able to do at giving your team space as well. Okay, habit number 5 is around prioritizing connection and celebration. So habits are cemented. I mentioned this already. So habits are cemented when we celebrate the behavior instead of the outcome. So in the last one, I talked about starting to track the behaviors that you're taking as a fundraiser. And you can start by just brainstorming. What are all the fundraising behaviors you wish you and your team were taking more regularly, because you know that down the line, that would positively impact your fundraising. And then you want to create opportunities to really celebrate those behaviors. And together, you can do them inside your brain. That's called shine. And that's a really wonderful thing to do, to just say, wow, good job. You made those 3 thank you calls or whatever it is, just giving yourself that little positive reinforcement, but also coming together and figuring out opportunities to celebrate those behaviors is really important. How many of you have gotten to, so I don't know how many of you have sort of December 31st as the end of your fiscal year versus the summer end, but the day after the end of your fiscal year, how many of you how do you feel about that day? Like, how does January 1st feel, or July 1st? Like, for a lot of people that I talk to, those days are filled with like a lot of dread, right? They're like, we just like dragged ourselves across this finish line, and we maybe hit our fundraising goal. Maybe our fundraising goal is now higher, right? Relief. Okay, I love that you feel relief, because I feel like a lot of people, maybe they have this one moment of relief, and then the reality of doing it all over again sets in again, and there isn't a lot. Okay, Becca, oh my gosh, I love that. Excitement for the new year, new start. Okay, I love all of this. What you want throughout the year, though, is to still be able to celebrate things that are not just about these huge milestone finishes, because that's what's going to help cement those behaviors throughout the year and keep you motivated, keep you connected throughout the year. So this is similar to the last one, but identify the actions that you want to be taking, you and your team. Figure out how to prioritize those actions. Decide how you're going to celebrate each time somebody does one of those actions, and then figure out how you can integrate it into, whether it's your staff meetings or however you come together, where you're going to sort of ensure that shine has been given, that you've been recognizing those actions, that you're really creating a feedback of celebration around the behaviors that you're taking, not just the fundraising outcomes. Okay. Last thing before questions. One of the things, so in my book that's coming out later this year, I talk about the elements of fundraising that really lead to chronic stress and burnout. And I talked about those a little bit at the beginning here too. I talk about pressure, I talk about rejection, uncertainty, isolation, power dynamics. One of the things that I think really increases isolation for fundraisers is this way in which it gets siloed away from the work, right? It's like, oh, this is like the work of the organization, and then the fundraising is just the means to the end, or this necessary evil, or something like that. And that creates additional isolation in fundraisers that I think is really misguided, because good fundraising and good marketing, that is the work, right? That's about creating coalitions and communities and people who are aligned with your mission and the work of the organization. Like when fundraising is really done with connection at its center, when you're really giving people opportunity to make the change that they want to make in their community, that is the work. And so I want you to know like how important you are, fundraisers, to the mission of your organization, to the health of this sector. The work you're doing is sacred and critical. And I hope that you feel that and know that on a daily basis. If you are interested, it probably shouldn't be the wait list anymore. The book is apparently out for pre-order right now. I'll put that link in the chat as well. If you're interested in pre-ordering, or if you just want to like learn more about it, you can check it out at malloryerickson.com/book. I also have, we're going to go into questions in a minute, but I also have a free fundraising community of people who are working to integrate some of the things that we talked about today into their fundraising in community with each other. It is a group of incredible fundraisers, nonprofit leaders, people who probably don't even identify as fundraisers, but are doing some of the fundraising. There's almost 2,000 folks inside. If you have questions about things, people are eager to jump in and help each other out. And so that is over here at whatthefundraisingcommunity.com. So I'll put that in the chat as well. And then I think we'll move to questions.
Thank you so much, Mallory. That was amazing. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, I am a former fundraiser. So you were also speaking to me. I was like, where did you get this picture of my fundraising life? And like, as you can, yeah, right. Like, and as you can see, I desperately wanted to stay within the fundraising sector in some way, shape, or form. But like, obviously I moved out of a fundraising role because you're right. Like the burnout is horrible sometimes. So good on all of the folks who lasted longer than I did, honestly, because you're doing, as Mallory said, important and good work. I'm actually going to butt in with my own question before we get into the questions of other people, because I'm the host and I can. So my question for you actually is talking about your failure Fridays. As soon as you said it, the first thing in my brain was like, oh, so it's just an opportunity for people to kind of like, well, here was my failure, but pat me on the back for all my good things. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about what that may have looked like, so I can get a better sense to maybe something we could apply to even our own team here at Keela.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you mean like people would get a pat on the back for the failure, or just for like all the other things?
Well, for all the other things, like, oh, well, I didn't send my newsletter out until 2 hours later, but then I got a response rate of 37%. I don't know. That was just my first thought of what would happen. But with the fact that you said that wasn't the case, I want to know more.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the reality. So first of all, I think this really starts with like the leader of whatever team you're doing, and sort of just with like what I said about the things that create connection, right? Is like if I let myself be more fully known, you're going to let yourself be more fully known. If I let myself be vulnerable, you're going to let myself be vulnerable. You're going to let yourself be vulnerable. So if I start that share by saying like, yeah, you know what? Like there was this donor that I was supposed to email back this week with, with information about X, Y, and Z. And I like still haven't done it. and I like feel a lot of resistance inside of me, and I'm worried that if I don't do it soon, like I'm gonna miss this opportunity. And so that's sort of like my big, like, quote unquote, failure for the week. Or like I went on this student trip and I forgot all of the bug repellent, and that was like super expensive because then I had to go buy the bug repellent in country, and like I know that like when the accounting goes through, like people are not going to be stoked about that. And that was my mistake because I know it was on the list and I was moving too fast. And so what that means for next time is like I'm actually putting something on my calendar to pack like with the list as a reminder for myself in the future. But like that was a real thing, right? And so maybe these things, like thinking about the things that we like hide or don't say, or we feel shame or embarrassment around, if the leader can really start there, it opens up space for other people to share.
I love that. Thank you so much, Mallory. Okay, so we'll jump into actual questions now that aren't just me. So one of them came from George, and he'd like to know is, can the organization, your organization, receive a grant for their organization from grantors? And I'm not exactly sure what you mean here, George. So if there's some clarification you want to make in the chat, that's great. But I'm going to make an interpretation maybe. Can an organization get a grant to utilize your services, Mallory?
Definitely people have funders like support their capacity building and work with me like using capacity building grants. Absolutely, you can do that. But if you're asking if I'm a pass-through organization, I'm not. I'm not a nonprofit, like a registered nonprofit. I'm a LLC, so I don't work as an umbrella for nonprofits.
Gotcha. Thank you. Karen is just asking, in that test of emails that you mentioned, where some mistakes are actually better than none, is there a point where too many mistakes would be less successful? As an example, if she were on the receiving end, she would find too many mistakes in an email to be a turnoff.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't have the test in front of me, although I bet if you Googled it, you would find some, because I think this has been tested in a lot of different like sectors, and so you could probably find a few different examples. And my suggestion is not that you all intentionally make mistakes in your emails. What I'm saying is that like sometimes I watch organizations like review a newsletter 32 times or have 5 different people reviewing it. And what I'm trying to say is like, if there's 1 or 2 mistakes in there, you're fine. And in fact, like it's like that is human, right? So my like reason for sharing that was less about like do this and more about like don't worry about perfection, because actually that's what breaks trust, and people are looking for things that feel human.
Yeah, that's a great point. Karen says thank you. Just from my own experience, and this isn't even as a fundraiser, I've been recently accused of sounding like AI in emails. And then when people meet me on calls, they realize, oh, Elise is a real person. And one of the things they said was that it's because like there's not usually grammatical or spelling errors in my emails because I use Grammarly. So like I have a backup who's helping me with it, but it turns out that that makes me look like not a real person. So, there's that trust. Thank you, Demetrius. Yeah, Team Grammarly for sure. But yeah, so I think that that's a really interesting point, that even making mistakes can show that it's a real person behind the message. That's great. I don't think we actually had any additional questions. You were so absolutely thorough, Mallory. Oh, I do. I'm sorry. Alyssa, I missed one. Alyssa wants to know, they have a small team of 5 people and often need to connect with one another asynchronously. How can they ask for support from and offer support to their team members with something as invisible as fundraising tasks?
Mm. So I guess my question would be like, what does it mean? What does invisible mean? But I think like what I would think about is, okay, even if you guys are working asynchronously, what are the different behaviors that everybody is taking that that drive towards your ultimate fundraising success? And where are you tracking those behaviors being taken? So if it's invisible, it's because we're just looking at the money, right? And what we haven't done is designed out the things that lead towards that money. So if you're like, okay, we know that here are the things we do every year that help us raise this amount of money, and you want to think about the fundraiser behavior, and then can you track that in a Monday board, or like a task management board? Can you track that inside your CRM in a way that's transparent? You guys are could you buddy up every week and leave a voice note, like review the other person's sort of like task management thing, and then leave a little voice note of just like cheering them on, like, hey, I noticed this week you made 7 thank you calls, just wanted to tell you I see you, something like really simple like that. Like there's all these little ways we can think about that, both tracking for ourselves and tracking for each other, and that like cross like organization celebration, because even that moment of self, right? So if we're trying to get out of transactional fundraising, if we're trying to get out of scarcity mindset, just watching our bank account numbers are not going to do that. They're not going to do that, because then we are laser focused on the money. So take that step back as a team. Even if you're a small team, talk about the things you do that lead towards good fundraising for your organization, and then implement a way to track and celebrate. Asynchronous is totally fine, those things.
That's great. Thank you. Natalie would like to know, see, people came in at the last minute. Natalie would like to know specifically about fundraising through proposal writing. Do you see these principles as being important for proposal writing as well?
So yes, I mean, I think, look, connection is connection. So like, how in your proposal writing are you really letting the organization be fully known? How are you storytelling? How are you letting people in? How are you feeling like a human? Okay. If everybody sends these proposals, no offense, but with these like dry mission statements, like all of our organizations just start to blend together, right? Like your uniqueness is going to come through in how you let yourself be more fully known. Where can you be honest in a proposal? Like, we're asking for this because last year or 2 years ago, we actually focused on blank. And what we found was it didn't work for X, Y, and Z reason. And so that's informing how we're looking towards this. Like, where can you be honest and open in ways that lead towards deeper connection, even when they're reading your content? And then the other thing I would say is that if we're talking about grants and proposal writing, like figuring out if you can meet with people there and build actual relationships and actual connection. I know it's not always possible, but whenever it is, I really recommend that too, because at the end of the day, it is a human. These are human beings on both sides, right? And so as the more we can feel like that, the better. I know there are other questions coming through, so I want to make sure I.
Paul would like to know, he likes the idea of measuring behavioral change or perspective in partners or potential partners and not just outcomes. Do you have some helpful practical measures besides the typical new donor, donor retention, and overall lifetime giving, etc.? And what else would you pay attention to or look at even without measures? He likes gauging himself internally as well. So this is great stuff.
I mean, so I'm not even talking actually. I mean, you are going to track those things: new donors, donor retention, overall lifetime giving, but I'm really encouraging tracking fundraiser behaviors. So those could be outgoing one-to-one emails to set up a meeting. They could be voice memos that are like, every organization is different, right? So like maybe it's a personalized video check-in that you're sending to some of the donors in your portfolio, or sending them an article saying, hey, this thing made me think of you. I want to make sure you saw it, right? Like, how many non-transactional touch points have you sent this month? How many thank you calls have you made? How many meetings have you had? How many, follow-ups have you had? And sure, you can start to break those folks down by new donors or retained donors or things like that if you want, but we're talking about your actions as opposed to the donor's behavior.
That's great. Thanks, Mallory. Um, Kelly has a great question. This is just bringing us back to those like typos and mistakes. She'd like to know if this applies also to grants and proposals. She feels like she would be turned off by typos and grammar issues. Is it still something that you wouldn't pass through 32 reviews if it was a grant or proposal?
I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, you all have to make decisions about ROI. Okay. So like if you think 32 read throughs is going to like solve one comma splice, and the alternative was that you could have had two read throughs and you would have had one comma splice, like that is probably not worth whatever that is, right? Like 16 hours of team time for one comma mistake. Now, if grammar, like, I just feel like, no, I don't, my guess would be that you wouldn't see the same results in like testing grammar mistakes in a proposal as you would in like a human email, right? Like those are more formal writing things. But I think for all organizations, like perfectionism, perfect is not a real thing. And perfectionism is not actually about the quality of your work. So my question would be, what does excellence look like for you? How much time is it costing you? What would be the difference to get you to 95%? And if that's a significant time difference, if that's a significant time gap, because what I see is organizations spending so many hours in reviews of materials that incrementally improve those things. And so, but this is very different for every organization. And my guess is for the organizations that what I'm saying resonates with, like you kind of know this is you, right? You're like, okay, actually, I do know that our impact report after the third review was awesome. And maybe actually what we're stuck in is perfectionism and not excellence that's requiring all of these other people to look at it. So I don't know if that's helpful. Kelly, this is like a very, very organization by organization situation, but I think there's a real balance here around like, if the time you're spending trying to get something quote unquote perfect could mean that you apply to 5 other grants, that's like an important decision for organizations to make.
Thank you so much, Mallory. We are at our time now, so I'm going to invite anybody whose question we maybe didn't get to, because I think there might have been one or two, to join Mallory's What the Fundraising community, because either her or somebody else who's knowledgeable in this field is going to be able to answer your question there. So thank you so much, Mallory. I am so grateful for you for the information that you shared with us. Thank you to everyone who's joining. Before you go, I do want to let you know that there's going to be a very short survey that's going to pop up right at the end of the session. It takes about 20 seconds. We would greatly appreciate hearing your feedback. It really does help us with future sessions. I'm so sorry that our next session is yet to be determined. So do stay tuned on our website and email for more information, and we'll have that for you really soon. Thank you again so much, and have a fantastic Wednesday. Bye-bye.